the weight of silence. The rental cottage smelled of salt and neglect. Vikram Sengupta dropped his single suitcase on the wooden floor, disturbing dust that danced in the afternoon light, streaming through unwashed windows. Outside, the Arabian Sea stretched endlessly, a canvas of blue he once would have found inspiring. Now, it was merely there, like everything else in his life. 3 months ago, his award-winning documentary series had concluded its final season. 2 months ago, his father had passed away after a brief, brutal battle with cancer. 1 month ago, he'd walked away from his production company in Mumbai, leaving behind unfinished projects and unanswered calls. "You'll find everything you need in the kitchen," said the elderly caretaker who had shown him in. "Village market opens at 7, closes by sunset." The man paused at the doorway. "People come here for different reasons, but the sea doesn't care why. She just listens." Vikram nodded politely, eager for solitude. When the door finally closed, the silence wrapped around him like a heavy blanket. He moved to the porch facing the beach, sinking into a weathered chair that creaked beneath his weight. This small fishing village in Kerala wasn't on any tourist map. He'd discovered it years ago while filming a segment on traditional boat building. The memory of that younger version of himself, passionate, curious, hungry for stories, felt like remembering a stranger. The next morning, Vikram woke before dawn. Sleep had been fitful, interrupted by dreams of his father's hospital room and the relentless ping of work emails he'd stopped answering. He made himself a cup of instant coffee and walked down to the shore. The beach was empty except for a few fishermen preparing their boats for the day's catch. They nodded at him, a stranger they didn't question. Their acceptance was a relief after months of people wanting explanations he couldn't give. Vikram carried his camera out of habit, though he hadn't turned it on in weeks. The weight of it around his neck was both familiar and foreign, like visiting a childhood home now occupied by strangers. He walked aimlessly, feet sinking into damp sand, listening to the rhythm of waves that seemed to speak a language he'd forgotten. By midday, the heat drove him back toward the village. His stomach reminded him that coffee wasn't breakfast. Following a narrow path from the beach, he found himself in a small marketplace where vendors sold everything from fresh fish to hand-woven baskets. At a tea stall, he ordered chai and watched village life unfold. Children ran between stalls, old men played. Cards under a banyan tree, women haggled over the price of vegetables. It struck him how easily life happened here without the constant pressure he'd grown accustomed to. "You look like you could use something stronger than tea," said a voice behind him. Vikram turned to find a middle-aged man with salt and pepper, hair and the weathered face of someone who spent his life outdoors. "Thomas," the man said, extending his hand, "I run the boat tours when tourists accidentally find us." "Vikram, and there aren't many tourists here." Thomas laughed. "Exactly. Why I have time to drink tea at midday." He settled beside Vikram. "First time in our village?" "Second. I filmed here once, years ago." Thomas's eyes lit with recognition. "The documentary man. I remember now. You filmed old Varghese building his boat." Vikram felt a spark of something, not quite pleasure, but recognition. "He's still around?" "Passed 3 winters ago, but his grandson continues the work." "Different now, though. Fewer boats, more worries about the changing seas." As they talked, Vikram felt the first real stirring of curiosity since arriving. When Thomas invited him to visit the boatyard the next day, he found himself agreeing. Walking back to his cottage as the sun began its descent, Vikram paused at the shoreline. He raised his camera, hesitated, then lowered it again. The stories were still here, waiting. But the storyteller in him remained silent, buried beneath grief and exhaustion that even the constant whisper of waves couldn't yet wash away. Salt and cinnamon. The boatyard smelled of sawdust and varnish, scents that transported Vikram back to childhood visits to his grandfather's carpentry workshop. Thomas led him between half-finished vessels where craftsmen worked with quiet precision, their hands moving with generations of inherited knowledge. Most tourists want sunset cruises and fishing trips, Thomas explained. But the real story is here, in these hands. Vikram found himself nodding, his fingers itching toward the camera, hanging unused around his neck. Before he could act on the impulse, a heated discussion near the water's edge caught their attention. A woman stood with her back to them, gesturing emphatically at a group of fishermen. Her curly hair was pulled into a practical bun, and even from behind, her stance conveyed unmistakable authority. "Amara," Thomas said with a mix of admiration and exasperation, "our local guardian of the sea." As they approached, Vikram caught fragments of the conversation, something about fishing nets and endangered species. The woman turned at their approach, revealing intelligent eyes and a determined expression that softened slightly at the sight of Thomas. "Perfect timing," she said. "Tell them about what we discussed at the community meeting." Thomas raised his hands in mock surrender. "I'm just showing our visitor the boatyard. Vikram, meet Dr. Amara Fernandez. She's trying to save our oceans. Single-handedly." "Not single-handedly," she corrected, extending her hand to Vikram. Her grip was firm, fingers calloused from work. "But someone has to try." Up close, Vikram noticed the slight dusting of freckles across her nose and the faint scent of cinnamon clinging to her clothes. "You're a marine biologist?" he asked. "Among other things," she replied with a half-smile. "I run a spice shop in the village market. Science doesn't always pay the bills." Later that afternoon, curiosity led Vikram to her shop, a small but vibrant space filled with jars of colorful spices and dried herbs. The aroma was intoxicating after months of barely noticing what he ate or drank. "The filmmaker," Amara said, when she spotted him browsing. "Thomas mentioned you've been here before." Vikram nodded, running his fingers over a jar of cardamom pods. "Years ago. Your shop wasn't here then." 3 years now. It was my grandmother's dream. The marine biology came later." She measured turmeric into a paper packet for another customer. "What brings you back to our village?" The question was simple but struck uncomfortably close to truths. He wasn't ready to voice. Just needed a change of scenery. Amara studied him with eyes that seemed to see more than he wanted to reveal. "Nobody comes to a place this remote for just a change of scenery. But your secrets are yours to keep." She handed him a small packet of spice blend. "For your kitchen. It makes even the simplest meal taste like something worth savoring." That evening, Vikram cooked rice with Amara's spices. The flavor awakened something dormant, a simple pleasure he'd forgotten during months of takeout eaten mindlessly at his desk. He carried his plate to the porch and watched stars emerge over the water. The next morning, he found himself walking the beach earlier than usual. In the distance, a figure bent over the sand, methodically collecting something. As he approached, he recognized Amara, a collection bag slung over her shoulder. "Morning," she called. "You're up with the fishermen." "Couldn't sleep. What are you collecting?" She held up a plastic bottle. "Evidence of humanity's carelessness. I document marine debris patterns before the village cleanup crew arrives." Without invitation, Vikram began helping. They worked in companionable silence until his bag grew heavy with plastic waste. "You have a good eye," Amara commented. "Most people miss the microplastics. Documentary filmmaking teaches you to notice details others overlook." She paused, studying him with renewed interest. "What kind of documentaries?" "Cultural preservation, environmental issues, forgotten traditions." The words felt strange in his mouth after so many months of silence. "So you understand why this matters," she said, gesturing toward the ocean. "This village exists because of the sea. If we lose her health, we lose everything." For the first time since arriving, Vikram felt the familiar stirring of a story taking shape in his mind. Not the story he'd come to escape, but something new, something alive in the passion of Amara's voice and the quiet persistence of the villagers balancing tradition with survival. That night, he cleaned his camera lens for the first time in months. The language of waves, the morning sky hung low and gray, promising rain. Vikram sat in Amara's spice shop, camera on the table between them, as she explained her conservation project. "The coral reefs near our coast are dying," she said, spreading maps across the wooden counter. "Between climate change, fishing practices, and tourism, we're losing ecosystems faster than they can recover." 2 weeks had passed since their first meeting, days filled with gradual reawakening as Vikram followed Amara through her routines, documenting beach cleanups, community meetings, and her research dives. His camera, once an extension of himself, was becoming familiar again in his hands. "So you map the damage?" he asked, studying underwater photographs of bleached coral. "And the recovery," Amara corrected. "Where conservation efforts are working, where community involvement makes a difference, that's the story worth telling." The shop door burst open as Thomas rushed in, breathless. Weather Service issued a cyclone warning, 3 days out, but it's a big one. The village transformed with the news. Fishermen secured boats, shopkeepers boarded windows, families stocked supplies. Vikram found himself caught in the preparation frenzy, helping Thomas move equipment to higher ground. "Your cottage isn't safe," Thomas told him that evening. "Too close to the water. You'll stay with my family." But Vikram found himself at Amara's door instead, camera in hand. "I want to document the village preparations," he explained. "If you'll help me understand what I'm seeing." She studied him for a long moment. "This isn't just about the storm, is it?" "No," he admitted. "It's about finding my way back." For the next 2 days, they moved through the village together. Vikram filmed while Amara translated the cultural context of each ritual and preparation. The elderly conducted traditional prayers for protection. Children helped weave barriers from palm leaves. Women prepared communal meals for those working. "They faced storms for generations," Amara explained as they watched an old woman teach young girls to secure fishing nets. "The methods evolve, but the community response remains." On the eve of the cyclone, with dark clouds building on the horizon, Vikram found himself drawn to the beach. The waves crashed with growing intensity, a language of approaching power. He raised his camera, capturing the churning water as wind whipped around him. "Not the safest place to be," Amara said, appearing beside him. "I needed to see it," he replied, not lowering his camera. "There's something honest about a storm. It doesn't pretend to be anything but what it is." She studied his profile. "What are you running from, Vikram?" The question hung between them, nearly lost in the roar of waves. Finally, he lowered his camera. "My father died believing I'd wasted my talent chasing commercial success." He was right. The admission felt like stones leaving his chest. "I built a production company that made profitable content instead of meaningful stories. Then he was gone, and none of it mattered anymore." Amara didn't offer platitudes. Instead, she pointed toward the village where lights glowed through the gathering darkness. "Look at them," she said. "Preparing, not running. There's a difference." As rain began to fall, they hurried back toward shelter. In Thomas's crowded home, villagers gathered with food and stories. Children fell asleep on improvised beds, while elders predicted the storm's path based on lifetime observations. Through his lens, Vikram captured not fear, but resilience, a community facing nature's power together. And for the first time in months, he felt the stirring of purpose, the narrative thread he'd lost finding its way back into his hands. Outside, the storm began in earnest, wind howling like a living creature. But within the walls of community, Vikram found unexpected calm. Beneath the surface, the cyclone left the village battered but standing. Roofs needed repair, boats required mending, but no lives were lost. In its wake came a strange quiet, the exhausted breath after survival. Vikram spent days helping with repairs, his camera documenting both destruction and reconstruction. The footage was raw, powerful, people salvaging belongings, neighbors rebuilding each other's homes, fishermen assessing damaged vessels. "This is what you came for, Amara," said one evening as they reviewed his footage on his laptop. "Not the peace you thought you wanted, but the truth you needed." A week after the storm, his phone rang, the first call he'd answered in months. His business partner, Rohan, sounded both relieved and urgent. "The network loved the concept for the Coastal Tradition series," he said without preamble. "They're offering full funding, prime slot, creative control, but they need confirmation by next week." The opportunity he would have jumped at months ago now felt complicated. "I need time to think," he told Rohan. That afternoon, he found Amara at the damaged coral reef, preparing for a survey dive. Her face was tight with worry. "The storm destroyed our restoration work," she explained, checking equipment. "Years of, progress. Gone." "Let me come with you," he said impulsively. "I've filmed underwater before." Beneath the waves, Vikram witnessed both devastation and resilience. Sections of coral lay shattered, but in protected pockets, life continued. Fish darting between crevices, anemones waving gently in the current. Through his underwater camera, he captured the reef's damaged beauty. Later, reviewing the footage, Amara grew quiet. "We need more than local efforts," she finally said. "We need wider awareness, resources, protection legislation." "A documentary could help," Vikram suggested hesitantly. She looked up sharply. "Is that an offer?" The question hung between them, laden with implications that went beyond professional collaboration. Before he could answer, his phone buzzed with another message from Rohan, increasing the pressure for a decision. That night, unable to sleep, Vikram walked to the beach. The moon-illuminated debris still scattered across the sand, remnants of the storm's fury. He found Amara there, similarly restless. "I got a job offer," he said without preamble. "Back in Mumbai, a series I conceptualized before everything." "Congratulations," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "When do you leave?" "I haven't decided if I'm taking it." She turned to face him fully. "Why wouldn't you? It's your career, your life. Because being here, seeing what you're doing, it reminds me why I became a filmmaker in the first place. Not for ratings or awards, but to tell stories that matter." Amara picked up a piece of broken shell, turning it in her fingers. "This village, these reefs, they're my life's work. But I'm one person with limited resources." "What if they didn't? Have to be just yours?" Vikram asked. "What if they became part of something bigger?" The question hung between them, full of possibility and uncertainty. In the moonlight, Vikram saw hope and caution battling in Amara's expression. The same conflict he felt within himself. "I can't stay just for a story," he admitted, "and I can't ask you to be part of my redemption narrative." "Then what are you? Asking?" He had no ready answer. They stood in silence as waves washed ashore, erasing footprints, reshaping the sand, a constant reminder that nothing remains unchanged. Tides of tomorrow morning found Vikram at the boatyard, helping with repairs. His hands, once accustomed only to camera equipment, had grown calloused from manual labor. Thomas worked beside him, quiet until they paused for water. "So," the older man said, "you're leaving." News traveled quickly in the village. "I haven't decided." Thomas nodded toward the horizon. "The sea doesn't give us answers, just shows us possibilities." By midday, Vikram had made his way to Amara's spice shop. She looked up as the bell announced his arrival, her expression carefully neutral. "I have a proposition," he said without preamble. "Not a perfect solution, but maybe a beginning." He laid out his idea. He would accept the network deal but negotiate terms. Filming would begin here, documenting both cultural traditions and environmental challenges. The village and conservation efforts would be the pilot episode, with Amara as a consulting producer. It wouldn't just be about the problems, he explained. It would show solutions, community resilience, the work already happening. Amara measured cardamom into jars as she listened. "And after the filming ends, you return to Mumbai, we return. To limited resources and slow progress?" "No," Vikram said. "I've been thinking about my father's criticisms. He wasn't wrong that I'd lost my way, but creating meaningful work doesn't require martyrdom. I can base the production company here, at least part-time." For the first time that day, surprise broke through her careful composure. "Here? In the village? I own a production company. Modern technology means we can work from anywhere with decent internet." He gestured around them. "This place, these people, they have stories worth telling. Stories that could bring attention, funding, protection." "And us?" she asked quietly. "What story are we telling?" The question hung between them, the unspoken connection that had grown alongside his reawakening as a filmmaker. "One that's still being written," he answered honestly. "I'm not promising forever. Just the chance to see where this leads, professionally and personally." That evening, as sunset painted the recovering village in golden light, they walked the beach together. The tide had reshaped the shore, erasing storm damage, creating new patterns in the sand. "I called Rohan," Vikram said. "The network has agreed to the modified proposal. Filming starts in 3 weeks. Amara nodded, taking this in. "And I've been offered research funding from the university in Kochi. They want to expand our reef restoration project. Will you take it?" "Yes," she said, "but I'm staying based here. Some work needs roots in the community to succeed." They stopped walking as the last sliver of sun disappeared beneath the horizon. In the gathering dusk, Vikram raised his camera, capturing Amara against the twilight sea, not as subject or symbol, but as a person choosing her own path forward. "I came here looking for silence," he said, lowering the camera. "I found something better." "What's that?" "A different kind of peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose." Amara smiled, taking his free hand in hers. "The tide always turns, Vikram. That's the one certainty." Above them, stars began to appear, navigation points that had guided sailors for generations. Below, the persistent waves continued their ancient conversation with the shore. And between these constants, two people stood on shifting sand, holding the delicate possibility of tomorrow in their joined hands. In the weeks that followed, the village buzzed with preparation for filming. Vikram moved his equipment into a small office above the market, where production plans took shape beneath ceiling fans that stirred humid air. Amara divided her time between the spice shop, reef restoration, and reviewing documentary outlines. Their relationship evolved cautiously, neither rushing nor retreating. Some evenings they worked side by side in comfortable silence. Other nights they walked the beach, sharing stories and possibilities. The future remained unwritten, but for the first time in years, Vikram faced uncertainty without dread. One morning, as fishing boats returned with their catch, Vikram filmed, the daily ritual that had existed for generations. Through his lens, he captured not just the surface activity but the deeper story, a community balancing tradition with change, finding ways to preserve both livelihood and the environment that sustained them. Later, reviewing the footage with Amara, he paused on a frame of an elderly fisherman teaching his granddaughter to mend nets. "This is it," he said softly. The story I came here to find without knowing it. Amara leaned against his shoulder, watching the frozen image that contained both past and future. Sometimes, she said, you have to get lost before you can discover a new way forward. Outside, the eternal tide continued its rhythm, retreating, returning, reshaping the shore, with each passage. Not an ending, but a constant beginning.